Inflation, why does it exist and where does it actually come from? I don't want you to end up prey to inflation, you know? There's 5 things you can do instead. But if you miss these 5 points, well, you'll be left behind because wages don't keep up with inflation. Now, there's a lot of jargon around this world of inflation. Quantitative easing and tightening, the Federal Reserve, printing of money, low interest rates, high interest rates, supply shortages, corruption, central banking. Look, those are all part of the problem. But the real question is, what's the solution? And I think you'd be surprised that there's some things that a lot of people miss. Like, what do loans have to do with battling inflation? Or what are the skills that make the biggest difference that if you enhance these, if you invest in these skills, you'll exponentially outpace what inflation is? Or what type of assets matter that really help you, that if inflation exists, those start to go up? And ultimately, if you want to battle it, if you're stuck right now being like, man, I can feel it. The price of everything went up so much. What do I do? Well, one thing you do is save on tax. See, money likes momentum, and there's fast money. When you understand real estate's role with inflation, or commodities like gold, silver, and even what people would call digital gold like Bitcoin, or even know that certain stocks actually mitigate inflation, then all of a sudden you're in the know. Then you can have strategy. But you got to know what types of investments work. Why would they work? Which ones are best for inflation? You know, why is it that real estate works for some people with rents going up and property values rising during certain times? And when is that risky? Or what tangible assets investors use to battle inflation? Things like commodities. This is where prices rise alongside of inflation. And there's ways to hedge it, you know, where you're like, okay, if inflation exists, maybe I have my plan, but what are the hedges I have in case it goes different than expected? There are certain stocks and sectors like energy that absolutely can thrive during inflation. But if you're going to get into things like Bitcoin, you better have a longer term view because it's going to be volatile. And yes, it's outperformed about any other asset, but why? That's the question. And is it right for you? It depends on your investor DNA. If you don't know what you're doing, you can get yourself in a lot of risk. And guess what? Risk without knowledge, that gap is where people lose a lot of money, they lose a lot of peace of mind, and it starts to harm and hamper their quality of life. So we're going to definitely talk about those hedges when it comes to inflation. We're going to talk about the high-risk things that people do that inflation actually hurts them. Because if you don't know about it and you're investing in something and it's all going swimmingly, but then all of a sudden the Fed makes a change, or you're doing it just because of tax and there's no fundamentals behind it, it could put you at risk. Some people are good at like farmland and agriculture, which could be very helpful. Again, tangible assets matter. Long-term perspective matters, but understanding short-term volatility, there are tools where you can do better than a savings account, 5 to 15% better, and still have your money protected. And then you can make sure when there's a change in interest rates, you're not losing money. We watched this a few years ago with Silicon Valley Bank. They had so much money because the Federal Reserve said, hey, we're going to give all these banks a bunch of money that hopefully they'll lend out. And instead of lending it out, they held on to it. And when interest rates went up, the value of their assets went down. And then when people heard about that and wanted their money back, felt it was risky, it created a run on the bank. So I'm going to help you through all that. But before we do, I think we got to begin with the ream. Where do we even get this information and knowledge? And I think if we could laugh a little bit about this, it would help out. Like, for example, collecting taxes is kind of a big job, right? It's a lot of work. I don't find people love paying tax. I haven't met the person that's really excited about that. By contrast, inflation is like a stealth tax. It's a way for the government to create new money it can use without having to take it from you. What they're really taking is the purchasing power of your existing money, which is why inflation is a tax. So it's easier for the government to go further in debt than it is for them to raise taxes, right? See, and look, that's just not the same for us all, right? If the government gets into trouble, they just have the Fed print more money. If you do that, you go to jail. So inflation's kind of like watering down soup. Same number of ounces, but half the taste. And it won't fill you up either. More water, less broth, less meat, less nutrition. You get the point. Your money's watered down too. The value's leaking, and financial leakage, that doesn't sound good, right? It doesn't sound pleasant at all. Money represents value, and that money loses value when we add 40% more without anyone creating any value. Money just loses its ability to buy as much. You have the same money, it just doesn't do the same stuff. So many ways, there's just so many ways to make money worth less, but hopefully not worthless. That's why you're here. See, here's the worst part. We don't decide this. Someone else decides this for us, and they just do it. Well, all of our hard work keeps losing value. Like, money's just a store of value. It's like if I help someone do something, I like, thanks. They can give me thanks with money so I could then have someone else help me because of the value I provided. And if all of a sudden we just abandon that and say, no, we're just going to add more. You see where the problem is? In 2002, the published rate of inflation according to the Consumer Price Index was 9.6%, which means at the end of the year, $100,000 would only spend like $91,000. Now, this isn't all bad. I mean, mostly, but not all. The silver lining is inflation helps your debt, meaning that the same payment 5 years from now will feel much better than it does today. I mean, sure, the loan payment remains the same, but now there's more money printed, and that money doesn't buy as much goods and services, requiring more, which means the same payment will feel like less. Point blank, inflation's a money disease. It's kind of like your money's not doing as well anymore. It just can't perform or go as far as it used to. Inflation sounds like things should be rising, but apparently our money's flaccid. I think we need a money boost, limp money. Increase your purchasing power with Viagra. I know that's a little bit cheesy, but come on. It's a little green pill that helps your money stay erect and impressive. Plus, inflation is just out killing our made-up stuff. It's getting out of hand, like the tooth fairy. How much are you supposed to leave now? My nephew was all pissed off because one day he only got coins. He was like, my friend Jeremy got $10 bill. I'm like, well, Jeremy's parents are a-holes who are screwing this up for the rest of us. We ended up this fairy who likes teeth so kids could get a quarter and not feel weird about having a mouth that looks like a shooting gallery. That's extortion that we invented. Plus, every year there's Santa. How much are we supposed to spend on this lie? Used to get a sock with an orange in it, maybe a candy cane if you were lucky. Back in the day, Christmas was all baseballs and Lincoln Logs or a choo-choo train. You know, the types of toys you could believe were made by the elves at the North Pole. Now it's all PlayStations and iPhones, which should flat out ruin the myth on its own. So, no, the North Pole's not in China. Then there's the Easter Bunny. Easter Bunny, really? This is just third-tier cosplay that kids are using to dupe us for gifts. You see them in the mall. They've redone Santa's place with eggs, baskets, and that annoying fake grass that gets everywhere. He doesn't even talk. He just sits there all soulless with his idiot face and stupid fake carrot. Plus, the Easter Bunny's a jerk. Every other character brings you things, but the Easter Bunny's the only one that hides it from you. Hey, here, kid. Go spend 15 minutes looking for an egg with 6 unwrapped Skittles in it and some of Grandma's loose change. Hey, Ma, look. There's a nickel in my M&Ms. Yeah, well, you better hold on to it. That's a single M&M might cost a nickel soon, right? So, yeah. In summary, inflation makes more people worth $1 million, but it makes it so that $1 million can't even buy you a house. So here's the first thing. If you don't recognize this with loans, then you're going to have this problem. I know a lot of people, once they pay off a mortgage, like for whatever reason, they have what I call arrival syndrome. They paid it off and they don't want to learn anymore. They're like, I've arrived. Like, great. If you paid off your mortgage, that's great. That's awesome. But where there's a contradiction, there's people all the time, because I put out a lot of articles on Forbes and these videos where people are like, man, once I paid off my mortgage, I was able to put so much more money into my investments, and those are just growing so well, and they're blowing up. And I'm like, wait, if they were growing so well, then why didn't you have them grow first and then just pay off your home sooner? Because if you're only paying 3% on a mortgage, but you're earning, I don't know what so well is, 7, 8, 9, 10%, it's because that 7, 8, 9, 10% is not guaranteed. They don't know that it's actually going to sustain. And they're not talking about the down years and the fees and things like that. But look, if you have assets, I'm not talking about loans like buying something on a credit card and taking a trip and coming home and not having the money to pay it off. That is just debt that absolutely destroys. I'm talking about loans that are attached to an asset. Now, ideally, that's an asset that cash flows. Getting a loan to buy a business. Getting a loan to buy some real estate. Something that's productive. There's inflation benefits to loans. The real value of debt decreases. So inflation erodes purchasing power, right? As prices rise due to inflation, the money you borrowed has less purchasing power in the future. But you have fixed payments that feel cheaper. If you have a loan with a fixed interest rate, your monthly payments stay the same, but those payments are worth less in today's dollars. Here's an example. Let's just say that you borrow $100,000, okay? And you've borrowed that at a fixed interest rate. 10 years later, your $100,000 doesn't buy as much as it used to. While the debt amount remains the same, its value relative to inflation has declined. Meaning if I have a $100,000 loan today, 10 years from now, that $100,000 or 5 years from now might only really buy $50,000 worth of stuff in today's dollars. It's that all the prices went up, right? So your income typically increases wages and prices rise with inflation. So over time, inflation often leads to higher wages. It doesn't always keep up. But assuming your income adjusts to inflationary pressures, it means it's easier to pay debt. So as your income increases, so you have this income, it increases over time, right? The fixed loan payments feel like it's a smaller percentage of your overall income. So hopefully 5 years from today, if you're making, $100,000 a year, maybe you're making $130,000, $150,000, yet your mortgage payment remain the same. So it's lower real interest rates, right? Fixed rate loan benefit. If inflation rises, but your loan has a fixed interest rate, the real interest rate decreases. So if the interest rate on your loan is 4%, 4% interest rate on that loan, but inflation is a measly 3%. We know it's been a lot higher than that. The difference between that is 1%. 4 minus 3. So the real interest rate is effectively making the cost of borrowing cheaper over time. Plus, again, if you're buying assets, there's increased asset value. Inflation raises asset prices. If the loan is used to purchase assets like real estate, the value of asset typically will go up with inflation. Even if the property needs more work, even if it's older, it's simply because the price is going up because of inflation. The asset appreciates while the loan remains fixed, increasing your overall net worth. So let me draw this example. Let's just say, for easy numbers, you have a $300,000 home, okay, and you have a mortgage on that. Now, because of inflation, your home goes up in value to $450,000, right? Same home, $450,000. But again, your loan amount remains unchanged. So debts stay fixed, but expenses inflate. Borrowers benefit because debts are fixed while other costs in the economy, rent or living expenses for others, rise with inflation. I've seen this with my family. I've got sisters that right now, both of them have beautiful homes, and the payment on their home is less than they could get with rent. If they go to rent something right now, because they've owned these homes for longer than 5 years, rent would cost twice as much for a similar property. Now, if they did exactly what their mortgage is to rent right now, they would have to massively downsize, right? So you can see the advantage when you have assets because of inflation. People that get hurt the most in inflation are just looking at their wages, and if inflation goes up higher than the wage, they start having to get a second job, work harder, grow their business, do something to figure it out when those cost of goods go up. So that's the first issue. That's one of the ways that you could battle and deal with inflation. The second, if you really want to battle inflation, if you really want to beat inflation, knowing that just trading time for money is never going to be the solution. If you just have a fixed wage with no upside potential, if you're not entrepreneurial or intrapreneurial, you'll find yourself in a situation where you're going to lose to inflation. This is why, I've got a family filled with teachers, a lot of teachers, public school teachers. And you know what? Their wages have not come close to keeping up with inflation, which they ended up getting advanced degrees, moving to becoming vice principals instead of just a teacher. To handle those kind of things, they had to actually switch what they did or increase their skill sets or their knowledge. Now, that's in a more fixed environment. If you're an entrepreneur, or if you're on a 1099 income based upon commission, the exponential skills out there are sales. How can you improve your sales skills? Now, some people feel like sales is like this negative bad thing because we've been manipulated by people that simply go through a script without thinking about the value they create. And maybe they're selling something that doesn't work. Here's the first rule. Be with an organization, sell something that matters, that you believe in, that you could get behind, something that you're like, this is something that actually improves people's lives. That's the biggest game changer. Then second, how do you improve your communication? How do you make sure to become a better listener? How do you find out what people really desire and help connect them to the solution? Sales isn't just about pushing. Sales is about understanding and communication. The second thing is marketing. You might be the best at what you do in the world, but if no one knows it, then you don't have the profitability. As you can reach more people, you can absolutely increase the money that you make. You either reach more people or you more deeply impact the people you're reaching. Reach, reputation, sales, marketing, these are exponential skills. Get really good at operations. I'm not talking about like as a doctor, I'm talking about operations within an organization. There's inefficiencies. There's so much tools with technology and AI that can remove busy work and allow for you to get further faster without the burden of being overwhelmed or working yourself to death. You know, one of the skills that we're all looking for, and this is shining in today's world, leaders. When we're in a time of change, when we're in a time of chaos, when we're in a time of frustration, when we're seeing that things aren't working the way that we want, we can point out all the problems in the world. There's so many problems. And if you just point out the problems and complain about it, that doesn't lead to profitability. That doesn't help you battle inflation. That just leaves you in a situation of desperation, frustration, and ultimately victimhood. So we're looking for leaders to say, look, follow me. I'll show you the way to have a better life. And then you heavily invest in being that person. And you tell the truth. What we're looking for in today's world more than anything is people that are authentic, people that are showing up and they're not hiding something. The most influential people on podcasts and things like, you look at like how authentic they are, how open they are, how they admit about their mistakes and they learn from those mistakes and they help people avoid those mistakes. Some of the most powerful people I know had deep pain in their life. And when they figured it out, they said, I don't want other people to have to go through this. And they become passionate about what they do. Financial literacy is another one of those skill sets. I don't know why, especially here in America, people have just gone to the lowest common denominator when it comes to finance. I just hand my money over, I set up a budget, and I hope for the best. Well, here's what that does. 95% of people at age 65 in America are not financially independent. If they stop working, they don't have enough income to come in to cover their expenses. It wasn't from a lack of effort. The media might tell you that people are lazy or that they're stupid or that they just don't have good savings habits. It's that they don't know how to mitigate risk. It's that they take on too much and then all of a sudden when they have a financial surprise, it confiscates too much of their wealth. They don't have the right information because they're trained in this notion that, hey, I just set it and forget it. I invest early, often, and always. I put all my money in a retirement plan and just pay off my mortgage. And guess what? They get decimated by inflation. They get hurt when something happens. They didn't have access to capital. You've got to pay yourself first. You got to plug your financial leaks so you keep more of what you make. You got to have at least 6 months savings set aside in case there's a health challenge or a career change or economic turmoil or a pandemic or whatever it might be, so you have that staying power. And then you invest in yourself. We've neglected that outside of the university model. We've seen that model has been failing over time because kids come out of school ill-prepared. They're not getting high-paying jobs that used to happen in the past because more and more companies aren't as concerned with a degree as much as the ability someone has to contribute. So it isn't just the school we get in the classroom. You're watching this, listen to this. It's a school outside of the classroom. It's figuring out what your expertise is and doubling down so you become exponentially valuable. But in financial literacy, if we skip out, hand our money over, hope for the best, and then all of a sudden a market goes down and then all of a sudden our peace of mind follows. We don't know why it would work. We don't know how we're going to benefit. We're locking our money away in a plan we can't touch till 15 and a half. We're only going to live off the interest, but if interest rates don't cooperate, that harms us. We have to pay tax on every dollar in the future because we deferred the tax, and if taxes go up, that hurts us. We have been trained to be illiterate when it comes to finance, that we don't have the time, that we don't have the expertise. It's not as complicated as you think. 80% of what we think we need to know in finance, we don't need to know. Like, you figure out your investor DNA, which is your values, what's important to you. Your drivers, what do you have energy for? And then your competencies, where do you have ability? You learn to become a better investor. You pay off inefficient loans. You pay yourself first and build up cash flow. And you invest in yourself in these exponential skill sets. You learn about the basics of how to transfer risk with your car insurance, homeowners, and liability. You learn how to, make sure to have disability insurance if something happens to you, but get it in an efficient manner. You make sure that you have saved as much tax as possible, that if you're a business owner, you know the right corporations and structures, that you know how to have the right cash flow reporting and the right things that help you to feel confident in what you do financially. And as they increase that confidence, you increase your productivity. As you increase your risk, you increase your chance of failure. And yet we've been sold high risk equals high return, but it doesn't. Risk equals chance of loss. Increasing our chance of loss isn't going to necessarily help us win. So if you get the foundational and essential pieces, it's something that you can learn. It's something that I'm putting out on a regular basis. Follow me on Instagram, and you'll just see I'm all the time just giving little daily doses of what people can do to become more financially literate. I've got books that are inexpensive, that are financial intelligence programs, so that you can know what to focus on and pay attention to and what is a distraction. And then you can take back control of your money and finances. The exponential skill sets that matter to me are communication, whether that's speaking, whether that's writing, whether that's listening and conversation. It's problem solving. And the most important of all is vision. Vision's the container in which we create value. If we don't have vision and we're just trading time for money and we're just in the grind waiting for one day, someday when we can finally retire because we're not enjoying life, we miss out on the beauty along the way. Quality of life isn't a consideration. Create a vision that is so compelling you can dedicate your life to it. It's different than a goal or an objective. Those you can do on your own. A vision is about co-creation and collaboration. It's about being beyond your reach, and you find a way to get there. Think about it. Like, one of the most important things I learned about vision was when our son had some health challenges and we didn't know how to solve them, we kept asking. When I wanted my comedy special to be on a streaming service and got it to Amazon Prime, I didn't know how to get there. I kept asking. Be willing to receive. Be willing to ask. Be willing to learn. Don't just say, I don't know. Say, what would it take to know? Who do I know that knows these things? Like, I want to have a bigger following here on YouTube, so I'm meeting with people that have big followings on YouTube, and I'm asking them what they do and what I'm missing and how I can improve. So you have to be willing to ask better questions to have a better life. Have a better vision, and it'll create a different standard of how you live. It'll create something exciting to work towards. But if you create a vision that you love, you've already won. You've created a life you don't want to retire from. You become financially independent, have cash flow to cover your expenses, and then every day's optional on what you do in work or not in work. Exponential skill sets is building and maintaining relationships. It's intellectual property. It's negotiation. It's storytelling. It's entrepreneurship. It's learning how to hire. These are the things that will help anyone battle inflation. You don't have to be good at all these things, but some are non-negotiable. Financial intelligence and value creation. And value creation comes from vision. Vision determines value, and money follows value. All right. So now on to the third piece. Third strategy. And the reason why inflation is so detrimental to so many people is because they just don't have the assets. They just focus on how much money they make, not on the assets that can create money for them even while they're asleep. So, look, cash and cash equivalents lose to inflation. Inflation is higher than what you're earning in your savings account. So just setting money there, that's fine for liquidity and short term. But even in the 6 months of expenses I like to have people set aside, having a little bit of silver and gold might make sense. Having some Bitcoin can make sense. Maybe you have to have a couple months of Bitcoin to have it count for one because of the volatility. But man, that thing has been on a trajectory of up. Having a little bit of cash or the cash equivalents, and that's just liquidity, cash value of life insurance of the right types, like properly structured, optimally funded whole life, could be instrumental for this. But that's just for liquidity. Beyond that, it's about deploying capital in a way, using your money in a way to create cash flow. just because an asset is inflation, protected, or inflation can move it up, doesn't mean it's an asset for you to own. If you don't want to invest any time in real estate because it's not something you enjoy, like me, don't go invest in things that you don't want to pay attention to, that you're not willing to learn about. I know real estate investors, they're going to workshops all the time. They're collaborating with a bunch of other people in the real estate game. They study it all the time. If that's not you, that's okay. If it is you, well, real estate's an asset protection against inflation. Rents go up over time. Value of the property goes up over time simply because inflation exists. Look at businesses. Businesses, when there's inflation, can change their pricing. That's another thing that can help you assess and address inflation. There are specific stocks you can look at, and those stocks are inflation like hedges, right? So you could look at that. Agriculture could be an inflation hedge. You can look specifically at the assets, but it's about owning assets instead of just making an income. So let's look at some other components to consider in addition to these factors that really contribute to inflation. So we know about just the prices that go up with inflation. But what about technological change? See, technology can actually help us battle inflation in some ways. Things become more efficient. They become less expensive. And so, what computers used to cost versus what they cost, some of them have gone down in price. There's certain technology that does that. But we also have to consider there's things we're buying now that we never even bought before. I've got 2 iPads close to me right now. I've got my phone. I've got a computer. I just have more technology today. I have all the video equipment. That didn't exist in the past. And then it's something that you start to acquire. That's kind of an inflation, even though it might move the consumer price index down, is how they kind of measure inflation. The overall basket of goods and say, hey, look, this is what prices are. But let's say I buy a new vehicle. That new vehicle now has self-driving. And that new vehicle has a bunch of road assistance and self-parking and automated wipers, whatever it is, just all this technology that didn't exist in the past. The price of the vehicle may have gone up, but they're not going to count it because there's new features. You upgraded. So there's also just luxury inflation. A luxury once enjoyed becomes a necessity. Like when I was dating my wife, she ate 5 foods. They was about as simple as possible. She loved some tacos and burgers and pizza. It was like a college kid's diet. And then all of a sudden we start eating at nicer restaurants. And she's like, wow, this is amazing. And then it's hard to go back, right? That's called propensity to consume or lifestyle creep. So there's technological change, which might make inflation say it's going down, but we feel like it's going up because we're buying new things. There's also planned obsolescence. We buy things, they break down, and we have to replace them. That's a cost to us. That's an impact on us. That's not show up in inflation either. But the one that's really to focus on is this lifestyle creep. See, I didn't ever fly first class until I was 27 years old. I'm 6'3", broad shoulders. Once I did, it's super hard to go back. It just is. It's now that's something I want. That's something I want to continue with. My wife with food. So what is that in your life? Now, I believe in value-based spending. What is it that you really value? There's certain things that might be worth the extra money for you. I'm not here to tell you to spend less. That notion, nobody shrinks their way to wealth. If it's all about cutting expenses, that's not going to get you to the ultimate place of being a value creator and producing more than you consume. It's all about cutting out and eliminating. You might eliminating things that help you be more productive or enjoy a higher quality of life or increase your energy. This happens with health all the time. I do a lot of extra stuff that no health insurance would ever provide, whether it's the adjustments that I get or the massages that I get or the food that I eat or the practitioners that I see that aren't part of the normal HMO system. Yeah, but by taking care of that now, I'm going to be better off in the future. But, now that I know about those things, I'm not just going to wait and wait and wait. And then that's what happens with people who just focus on their wage is they wait and they wait and they wait and it's not going up where they want and they don't have those assets to battle this. So there's things worth it. Value-based spending for health for me, that's how I am. Flights, what is it for you? Go on in the things that matter. But start to look at your finances and say, are there any expenses you have that are destructive? Meaning you're borrowing to consume, you're paying for it, not utilizing it. Just eliminate those. That'll help you battle inflation. The second is lifestyle expenses. Pick which ones matter to you. And if you don't have the cash to buy them, don't buy them. And start asking, what would it take? And then, Like I have certain things. If I hit production levels, we're going to Italy. If I don't, we're not. It's a game that I play to be a better value creator. So what is that for you? Now there's protective expenses. Don't neglect these. A lot of people don't have insurances to transfer risk or asset protection or the right corporate structures as business owners or enough liquidity. And what happens is they're one financial surprise away from a major setback. But if you have those protective things handled, you're better off. But here's where the exponential skills come in. Productive expenses are what matter. If you put in $1 and more than $1 comes out, don't budget that until it's no longer effective. Increase those. Invest in yourself. Build those skill sets. Grow assets. All right, the last piece here is inflation creates a natural increase in taxes. What do I mean by this? Well, let's say, again, we're at $100,000 of income. Let's just say your average tax rate on that is 20%. So you net $80,000. Okay, and that's in today's dollars. But let's say because of inflation, let's say it's relatively low, and 10 years from now, that $100,000, you'd need $200,000 for it to spend like $100,000. Well, $200,000 is a higher tax bracket. So now you might be paying 30% tax, right? So that's a much higher amount that's going to go out. Right now, you're $200,000. You're paying basically $60,000 in tax. So $140,000, which isn't spending anywhere close to $100,000 does today. That's been devalued because of inflation. So inflation can actually increase the tax effect. Taxes, if they stay level, we have what's called marginal rates. They increase naturally with inflation. So average rate is what you pay overall. So I said this was a 20% average, but guess what? The first $30,000 might only be taxed at 10%. Then we go from like $30,000 to $70,000. That might be taxed at 15%. Then from 70 to 100, it depends on if you're single and above. Now we're at 25%. So as you make more money, you go to higher marginal rates. So this is going to have a higher marginal bracket when you're making more money. So that's tax bracket creep because of inflation. So, and the other issue is when there's high inflation, corporations pass on the price of higher taxes to the consumer. So if we're like, let's tax these corporations more, because I know there's a lot of information out there saying, hey, what about all these corporations that aren't paying taxes? Trust me, they're paying self-employment tax. They're paying property tax if they own buildings. They're paying all sorts of excise taxes. It's just that they might not be paying as much income tax because they have ways to do write-offs. But if you do start taxing them more, they pass those higher taxes onto the consumer, which feels inflationary, right? So let's recap this. If you're willing to use loans to buy assets, those loans start to decrease in what it feels like to pay over time. So inflation actually benefits that. If you invest in yourself so that you can increase your income, and then part of that being financial intelligence so you can keep more of what you make, which is save on tax, save on interest, save on non-performing investment fees or improper design with insurance, you can keep a lot more of what you make and help you overcome that as well. And if you focus on assets more than just wages, those assets will go up over time simply because of inflation. And if you want to save on tax, I've got so much information on how to save on tax. You can watch my videos talking about the tax myths and things you could do to save on tax. There's so many down the fairway legal and ethical things that you can do, especially as a business owner. How you pay your employees, how you pay yourself, whether you take advantage of, a home office, whether you use the Augusta rule, whether you use Section 199A. There's just thing after thing. And if you want a guide, you can just DM me on Instagram, Garrett B. Gunderson. I'll give you the Tax Navigator Guide. It shows the formula, the frameworks, and it has a checklist so you can see what you've done and not done to maximize your tax savings. This is going to help you overcome inflation. Now, where's inflation coming from? This is the thing. I'm going to have a bit of a rant here, all right? Because quantitative easing was something that we watched happen in 2020. They basically added money to balance sheets for Wall Street banks and banks. Their whole philosophy was this: you know what? If we do this, then there's going to be more money in the economy, and then that will, improve everybody's life because the banks will lend money out and there'll be all this money in the economy. But guess what happened? Wall Street bought back their own stock with the money. So it transferred more to the wealthy. Banks held on to the money because they were uncertain and didn't want to lend it out, which created instability for them, because when they have that money sitting in a savings type account like a treasury bond, when interest rates go up, the value of those go down. Why does that happen? Well, let's just say you have $100,000 and it's earning back in those days like 2%, right? And then all of a sudden they increase that interest rate to 6%. You have a $100,000 bond. If you want to sell that to someone, why would they buy that from you? They could go get a brand new one and get $6,000 of interest. You're only offering $2,000 of interest. So you actually have to sell this low enough that you can compete with 6% interest. So it lowers the value of your bond. This is the problem. Quantitative easing created massive amounts of inflation. Then they started saying, well, we better tighten it. We better take money back. So they're constantly manipulating. And another big issue, this happened in 1913. The centralized banking system came about. So a centralized bank is, we don't know all the transactions that are happening. The Federal Reserve is neither federal nor reserve, and they have control of the money supply. It's not a government entity. They lend that money, so all of our money is debt. And what happens is, if I get a loan from a bank and they give me $1,000, the way that I spend a $1,000 loan is I have to deposit that into my bank. So when I make that deposit, there's a reserve requirement. That reserve requirement, 10% or less, and now they can lend out the other $900. So that $900 is being lent out, even though it was lent to someone else. So we have the same dollar being lent out 6 or more times. That's what fractionalized banking has become. And it's a closed-end system. We don't know exactly everything that's going on as an individual. So a depositor puts that $1,000 into the bank. The bank keeps $100 in reserve. Then the bank lends out $900 to another borrower. That borrower deposits $900 into the bank. That bank keeps $90 in reserve and lends out $810. And this cycle continues, effectively creating more money in the economy through repeated deposits and loans. The original $1,000 deposit can create multiple thousands of dollars in economic activity through fractionalized lending, creating more inflation. All right, so I just want to rant about we've got government spending and waste. We've got corruption within that government spending and waste. So we've got money being added to the system all the time, watering it down. So this leads me to the question, what would money Jesus do? When people say, what would Jesus do? Maybe that's the wrong thing to ask. Instead, they should make it more current. What would Jesus tweet? I think Jesus would be like, remember when I thought fasting meant walking quickly? Hashtag hungry AF. Hashtag day 39. Does the KKK know that I'm Middle Eastern? Hashtag awkward. Thought my dad was sending me to a rad concert today. Turns out it was Def Leppers. Hashtag thought the one-armed guy was a drummer. Hashtag don't pour your sugar on me. All right, just a little bit of joking there, but here's the real answer. It comes back to investor DNA. Don't invest in what you don't know, but start to invest. Begin by investing in your financial intelligence. Develop your skill sets. Not all investors are created equal because risk isn't in the investment. It's in you, the investor. If you don't know what you're doing, that's speculation and that's risk. So invest in mentors, learn, be part of communities. Do what it takes to become skilled. And you could do it with things that you're interested in. I love intellectual property, writing books, written a bunch of books. I love doing it. It's something I enjoy doing. It's part of my investor DNA. It's an asset to me. It allows me to build relationships, and people could buy the books, and they're very scalable and leverageable. I could sell these while I'm sleeping, and we can keep printing more. Find your investor DNA. Is it tax liens? Is it real estate? Is it commercial real estate? Is it fix and flip? Is it buying a business and flipping businesses? Is it building a business to exit? Is it building a business from scratch? What is it for you? And then Consider using loans to acquire assets if you can. What do I mean by if you can? If you can't sleep at night, yes, it's going to help you battle inflation, but it's not going to lead to a better life. And find ways to make money on the buy. You're buying and you're profitable from day one, not just waiting and hoping down the road it's going to work out. As an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur, someone working in an entrepreneurial organization, ask, how do I contribute to the bottom line? How do I add more value? And how do I get paid on that upside? If you really want to do anything, you've got to get out of the isolation game. People get isolated in money. I'll just work harder. Working harder isn't always the answer. If you're working harder than the wrong thing, hard work with the wrong philosophy equals bankruptcy. So if you're going to do something that you've never done before, find a co-creator, someone that supports and inspires you, someone that brings you accountability to move beyond scarcity. You know, if I'm doing a book, I want an editor. I've got a video director here today. Like, it's co-creation is the game. Then you delegate. As you start to build momentum, delegate the things that you're not great at that drain your energy and find someone that's better at that than you and delegate a role to them so they own it, not just a task. And ultimately, that's a game of collaboration. Prosperity is not a do-it-yourself game. It's a game of collaboration. And if you can create a vision bigger than your problems, and if you can live in the world of value creation and invest in becoming a bigger value creator, the more value that you create, the more impact you'll have, the more people you reach, or the more deeply you impact the people that you do reach. And this is how to escape the trap of complaining about inflation, having wages not keep up with those higher numbers, feeling the pinch when things go on, and then instead leverage it and have it benefit you.